February 19, 1945, D-Day on Iwo Jima. The largest force of United States Marines ever sent into battle assaults the most heavily fortified island in history. Iwo Jima becomes one of World War II's most costly conflicts for both the Americans and the Japanese. February 19, 1985, the 40th anniversary. Japanese and American survivors make a historic return to the battlefield of their youth. The former enemies, who once did everything possible to destroy each other, meet again on the sands of Iwo Jima, this time in peace. The famous image of the American flag being raised during the Battle of Iwo Jima has been a symbol of patriotism for 40 years. But the battle it immortalized remains one of the bloodiest ever fought. I'm Colonel Ed McMahon, United States Marine Corps. We're here to tell two stories, one about war, the other about peace. Iwo Jima was the toughest campaign in Marine Corps history. Almost 1/3 of all Marines killed in World War II died fighting for the tiny island. For the Japanese, it was even worse. Of the 21,000 soldiers there, 20,000 died. For those who survived the battle, Iwo Jima was the last place on earth any of them ever wanted to see again. But as the 40th anniversary approached, many veterans felt compelled to return to Iwo Jima to confront memories that have haunted them for 40 years.
I did have very bad nightmares for many years after the war, and my wife Betty, whom I was married to then and still am, sometime I'd wake up in the middle of the night and the bed would be soaking wet with perspiration, and I was having a nightmare. And other times she'd even find me out in the backyard. I don't know how I got there, and with my rifle or my pistol, and waiting for the Japanese still to come at night.
I do not think I would have been the same person if I had never gone to Iwo. I think I'd have been a different kind of a person. And I'm glad I went. I think I became a minister because of Iwo.
That is one of my everlasting memories of Iwo Jima. Our visit to the cemetery to say our last goodbyes, and in some cases to lay down a little memento of our friendship with the deceased on his grave. Some little thing that each of us had shared in some way, perhaps. In my own case, I had a pen which was given to me by Fred Willard, and I laid it on his grave because that's all I had to remember him by, and I was returning it to him.
Iwo Jima is a remote 8-square-mile volcanic rock. But in the last year of World War II, it was crucial to Japan's defense because it held the only airfields between Japan and the American bases on Guam and Saipan. As American B-29s flew to and from bombing missions over Japan, Japanese fighter planes from Iwo attacked. Radio reports from Iwo gave Tokyo several hours warning before each raid, and large numbers of American pilots and planes were shot down. If Iwo Jima's airfields were in American hands, they could provide a safe haven for crippled bombers that were being lost at sea, unable to make it back to their bases. Iwo Jima had to be captured. Both sides prepared for a major battle. Unlike every other Pacific island where Japanese and Americans clashed, Iwo Jima was Japanese soil, the first piece of Japan itself to be attacked. it would be defended to the death. The Japanese had transformed Iwo into the most impregnable fortress in the history of warfare. The entire island was carved into an elaborate maze of underground tunnels and thick concrete gun emplacements and bunkers. With all the Japanese troops hidden safely underground, months of American bombing raids before the invasion had little impact. On the eve of the invasion, the largest armada ever assembled in the Pacific, over 800 ships carrying 70,000 Marines surrounded the island. As the Marines launched their attack, it was still Sunday evening in America. News of the invasion was blacked out, and American families listened to the radio, unaware of what their sons, husbands, and brothers were facing half a world away.
Hi there, Charlie. Gosh, it sure is swell to have you back.
Yes, you lucky people, you.
9:02 a.m., Monday, February 19th, 1945. The Marines stormed ashore and sank deep into the loose black sands of Iwo Jima.
There was noise everywhere, shells exploding on the beach, going over the top of our boat, confusion, people trying to handle equipment and getting bogged down in the volcanic ash, and guys getting shot, killed, wounded, screams, just bedlam. To see a tank man who had been cut by shrapnel and one across his abdomen to the point that his bowels and his intestines came out, and he was trying to hold them in his hands, and they kept dribbling over the sides and down onto the sand, and he stepped on them and slipped. To have seen that and watch it, try to a person cope with that stuff is shocking and indelible.
Plane 2 goes zooming above, blasting ahead of us. There goes the tank. There goes the tank throwing flamethrower into that pillbox back there. Knocking it out. It's out. There goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tanks. Tanks pulling over the side of the crest of the hill. We just received a report that the 5th Division has now crossed the island. They're far over the other side of the island. They've made their way, and it is reported that there are several casualties. The casualties are very heavy.
American casualties on the first day of fighting were higher than those on D-Day at Normandy.
By the time the corpsman arrived, I had almost bled to death. And you know, the funny thing about it was that I remember, and by this time, of course, I knew all the pressure points on the body, and I never lost consciousness, but yet I could not think where the points were to stop this flow of blood. And I remember real good sticking this thumb in that hole, you know, and said, well, maybe if I plug it up, it'll go. But anyway, the corpsman came and gave me 2 shots of plasma, and fortunately I was made it back to the field hospital, which was a tent set up. And if I remember, this was the only time I cried during World War II, is when the doctor laid me up on the table and he said, son, you want to go home? And they put me aboard a plane for Guam.
For 36 days, from March 10th to April 16th, we had nothing to eat. There was no food at all. All we had was 1 cup of water a day. On top of that, the water was infested with mosquito larvae, and it made us quite sick. I was an army surgeon, but there was no way to help the wounded soldiers. Also, in the caves, there were lots of lice. It was difficult to fight the battle and fight the lice.
A corpsman serving with the Marine Corps, in combat, his job is to treat the wounded, do the best he can to see that they're safely evacuated. I crawled over to a Marine who was lying on his back, and his chest was blown open. A combat dressing had already been applied to his chest by someone, and on his head was an M, which was written there, probably by the same person who put the combat dressing on him, and the M was to notify anyone who came along that the man had been given morphine. I knew he was dying, and I'm sure he knew it also. And he asked me if I would reach in his pack and take out a picture which was there. I did so. It was an 8 by 10 photograph of a woman with an infant in her arms. Probably his wife and child. It had several holes in it caused by the same shrapnel which had pierced the Marine's body and had also pierced his pack. I placed it in his hands. He looked at it, smiled very weakly. And then I crawled away. And as I crawled away, I looked back. He was still in that same position as he took his last breath. That's something that will be with me till the day I die.
This is a dreadful, desolate, ugly island. The dirt is sort of a grayish, yellowish, volcanic ash. Very soft and crumbly. And when you dig a foxhole, the sides keep coming in on you. Now we conclude this description of this little piece of hell on Iwo Jima.
Well, it looked like we were on a different planet. Yeah, I haven't seen anything in my life, a piece of land where there was no life. I was on 20 days on Iwo, and our morale was pretty low. There was not too many left of us, and we were advancing, and we were stopped by mortar shell. And I went in front of the front line for a better position to view where they're coming from. And doing this, I was running back and forth, and some Japanese sniper on my left flank, which I was not protected, shot me in the face. And on Guam, after they removed the bandages, a day later, I happened to look in the mirror, what I seen, and this, to me, was the end of my life. I didn't want to live no more. If there was a building or a gun, I know I would kill myself.
Hospitalized for 2.5 years after Iwo Jima, Ed Moranic underwent 19 reconstructive surgeries. In 1972, he had 3 more operations.
I found myself living in hell before I died. And maybe I would not have to go into hell or purgatory because I served my time on Iwo, and I would go straight to heaven.
And now, to turn to the chaplain, Father, you've been back in the States until very recently. This is your first bit of combat. Does it live up to what you had expected, or does it surpass it?
This is far worse than anything I ever thought of. Back home, all we ever thought of was glory. Up here, there is no glory, only death in its worst form.
I recall one incident on the northern end of the island when the Japanese were fighting the Americans. The Americans were shooting at us from the top of a cliff, and we were fighting from the bottom of the cliff. And we shot at them and killed one of the soldiers. The soldier fell over the cliff, and inside his pocket there were pictures of his family, one of a little boy and one of a baby. When I saw those pictures, it reminded me of my daughter, who was just born when I came to Iwo, and tears just came streaming down my face. And then I realized that both the American and Japanese soldiers were all suffering the same kinds of hardships. You know, losing our families and missing our loved ones back home.
some tanks had been used early on in the assault and had almost generated a very short road, and a young Marine had been killed right alongside what eventually became one of the tank tracks. And because the pressure was so extreme in that area at that particular time, they were unable to move his body, and I watched the traffic and the tanks just eventually just destroy his body over a period of 9 days. And I'll remember that a long time. I didn't even know who he was. But that was very, it was a difficult thing for me.
In the end, the conflict that American generals had predicted would take a few days lasted 5 weeks. Americans suffered 28,000 casualties. Among them, almost 7,000 men killed. Iwo became a graveyard for the dead and a nightmare for the living.
We went to this area where men are wearing rubber aprons, some are wearing gas masks. The helmets, the canteens, the 782 gear is all neatly arranged in its own particular pile. I asked someone what I'm to do with the body of my buddy, and he says, put it over there with the rest. I was completely unprepared for what I saw. A mound of bodies, almost pyramid in shape. Wide at the bottom, going up to the top. I'll never know how many dozens and dozens of bodies were in that heap. I remember saying to the fellow, I said, I can't put my buddy over there. I just can't throw him on that heap with the others. And he said, all right, you leave him here, he says. We'll take care of him first.
It's the last, kind of a last deed to do. For me, it won't be done until I can go there again. Even though we said we weren't going to go back, none of us wanted to. It's a compulsion.
February 18th, 1985, Tokyo. One day before the 40th anniversary of the invasion, 150 American veterans and their wives toured Japan's capital. For most, it is the first time they have visited the homeland of their former enemy.
And I really have to meet them before I know exactly how I feel. In other words, if their demeanor is proper, I mean by that not arrogant, then perhaps maybe we can shake hands and be friends. It'll be difficult. I could forgive them, I guess, if they forgive me.
Later that day, they attend a banquet honoring both the American and Japanese veterans.
Eternal Father, strong to save, we thank you for bringing us safely to this time and place where we make our final preparation for our pilgrimage to Iwo Jima. Amen.
Tell him I think he's really a super guy.
とても素敵な方だそうですよ、先生は。
ありがとう。
せーの。
Personnel weapons, 25th. 25th, yeah. I was in the 26th, so our quicker.
At this time, it's my privilege to introduce the Commanding General of FMF PAC, Lieutenant General Cooper, in his address to the veterans of Iwo Jima. General Cooper, please.
Before I get into a few remarks, I'd like to make one administrative announcement. And it has to do with the cost of your going from here to Iwo Jima and back. I'll solve this one right quick by saying that the Marine Corps didn't charge you the first time you went to Iwo Jima. And we're not going to charge you the second time.
After the speeches, toasts, and prayers, man after man is moved to return war trophies taken from dead Japanese soldiers 40 years ago.
You know, the way that it sort of affects me, you know, as an 18-year-old, you take these things, you don't realize that they came from someone, and, you know, they had families too. And I feel very happy that maybe we can get it back to the family. A different attitude than in Iwo Jima.
I guess my final words about this whole thing would be that I'm just so thankful that I've been one of the lucky ones that are able to return. It certainly has to be one of the high spots in my life.
I can't honestly say that I'm really looking forward to it. It's just regrettable that I say this, but and there again, and perhaps maybe after my visit, I may be able to turn my thinking around.
I think all of us who are going there are going to say a final goodbye. Many of us who were wounded and left early did not get that chance.
5 a.m., February 19th. D-Day plus 40 years. The veterans prepared aboard military aircraft for the 3-hour flight to Iwo Jima.
Ma'am, attention please. After you have gotten your cups of coffee, donuts, please report to your respective color-coded flight area. Thank you.
Our first inkling that we were going to Iwo Jima happened aboard ship after we had pulled out of Pearl Harbor and was heading west into the Pacific. That's the first time any of us had ever heard those words before, Iwo Jima. Daily, we would have classes topside on the attack transport that we were on. And they would have mock-ups and diagrams of the island.
Well, you knew that the following day that a lot of the guys that you were with wouldn't be around tomorrow night. You might say there was no merriment aboard the ship whatsoever.
I can't face those Japanese survivors and their widows.
Oh, is that right? Well, it hasn't bothered me yet.
Well, I spent 2 years, 6 months in a hospital.
Yeah.
And my wife, looking at me, she suffers with me, you know.
Yeah.
And I know what these people have suffered.
Well, that's true.
It's going to be a trying situation.
No, this is not a pleasant trip.
Huh? How's that going?
Honestly, I'll be glad when it's over with. I'm beginning to feel some apprehension and some feelings that perhaps, what am I doing here?
Gentlemen, on behalf of the 316th Tactical Airlift Group, we would like to welcome you aboard the aircraft, and we hope that your stay out of Iwo Jima today is a pleasant one. Thank you.
I know I've already got the butterflies. I can feel it. I know the anticipation is very great. How I'm going to feel when I get there, it's impossible for me to say at this time. But whereas I looked upon this whole thing with a rather jaundiced eye before, now I realize that I'm doing the right thing in going back.
You're worried. You don't give voice to much of it because it's a sign of fear, I suppose. I was inclined to underestimate the difficulty of the place, as was everybody else. You ask about our landing, is that what we saw coming up? Most of us had our heads down and we'd try to peep when we could. And there were shells landing in the water, so we were more inclined to put it down. But I know I made agreements with my buddies that something happened to me. They would visit my parents and I'd visit theirs.
At that time, Iwo Jima was considered to be a part of Tokyo, and Commander Ichimaru told us that we had to uphold Iwo Jima to keep them from attacking Tokyo. If we lost, we would be putting Tokyo in jeopardy, and we would be putting the nation in jeopardy. So we were constantly told to continue to fight.
$800 ships around Iwo Jima, and most of them firing. And on the way in, you're being fired at, and you look to your right and you see one of the landing craft where the guys take a direct hit of artillery. It's awful. I really can't comprehend that I'm really going to be going back to this place that's soaked with the blood of all of my buddies and friends who died there. I had a feeling that when I left here, I had a feeling when I left here that I shouldn't have left. What I'm trying to say is that I was leaving people behind and I should have stayed in their place. You understand?
Well, see, we ain't got much time. We can't see everything. But there's only a few things that, like guys like me want to see. Off the Banshee, get some sand up at Iwo Jima.
Did you think you'd make it? Huh?
Never thought I would.
Never thought we'd get off the doggone island.
Here's where we came ashore, right here. Right over at the terrace.
See that sand over there? And there? That's the way it was. There was none of this.
Well, this has been just recently plowed off.
Yeah.
They've opened this up.
The jeeps couldn't even go through there. How are you going to recognize something?
Yeah. Well, you might find some things, though.
When I went home, they didn't even recognize me.
There were jeeps, tanks, and gas masks, and bodies, and wounded people. And one of the sights I had nightmares from was a Marine who had apparently been just that moment before hit by an artillery round, which had cut off both of his legs just above the stumps. And he was sitting on his haunches and rocking back and forth. He was conscious, and he had a look of terror in his eyes that you just couldn't realize. And even today, I could almost just look down there and see him, you know.
Well, when you're on shore and you see all these bodies all mangled up, and it was like a jigsaw puzzle out there, and we didn't know what to do. We didn't know where to move. We could not dig. The terrain there, and it was just like it was ashes. You couldn't dig a hole. And what hurt me the most is when somebody was hollering for help, and I could not give no help because we were taught that we have to go inland and not to help anybody on the beach wounded.
You know, I've seen movies like you have. People die in war and get killed in war, but let's prepare for what we saw where bodies were literally blown to pieces, small pieces. Sometimes you never found the head. Sometimes you found only an arm. At other times you'd see, I can recall over there, just above the second terrace, a string of a man's guts. Not a polite word to use, but it's the actual word. Just as if you had disemboweled the man and laid him in a straight line. And that's all there was. About 5 feet of guts. No limbs, no other part of the body. Just blown away.
You can shoot a guy this height and flat down. There were a lot of guys that shot, laying right there, thinking they were safe.
Sure.
And they weren't. You know, they were just...
Well, sure, like you said, because of the high ground up there, they hit a dead eye on us out here on the beaches.
They saw everything you did down there. Everything you did.
They'll understand it better, you fellas will, when you get to the top of Suribachi and realize that command is just about every spot on the island.
Well, I certainly want to go atop Mount Suribachi again. If for any reason I could not go atop Mount Suribachi again, then the whole trip would be worthless to me.
That's my word.
Well, of course, we lost people. We had casualties, heavy casualties every day, my 16 days during the battle. And yes, I can look at the area and remember occasions where friends like Willie Wood and Dick Schwartz, Ben Tolan, and on these people, as we always said, got it.
Sure, every man who served here is proud. Even those who came away with very grievous wounds that they've carried with them since then, and I mean crippling injuries. They're maimed, will be for the rest of their lives. But inside them, they're proud, very proud to have been part of it.
I never left Iwo Jima because they carried me out. And they only carried my body out, but they left my mind there for 40 years.
If there's one thing people remember most about Iwo Jima, it's the image of 6 men raising the American flag on top of Mount Suribachi. And every man on Iwo Jima that day, American and Japanese, remembers how he felt.
Platoon Sergeant James Fenn from New York and I were holed up together. And we always called each other by last name. And he says, "Hey, Norman," he says, "look at the big hill to the rear." So they got the flag flying. And so I did. And I looked back, and you have a feeling that comes to your heart that you can't describe.
The raising of the flag symbolized that the time had come for Japan. Just as I felt when I saw the ships surrounding Iwo Jima. And from that point on, I didn't know what was in store for Japan.
The picture of the flag raising is the most famous photograph of World War II, perhaps of all time. But the photograph and the events surrounding it have been misunderstood for 40 years. The last surviving participants will help us set the record straight once and for all about the historic events of February 23rd, 1945. One of the Marines' first missions was to capture Mount Suribachi. From its height, hundreds of Japanese gunners directed devastating firepower onto the Marines below. On D-Day +4, a 40-man patrol from Easy Company, 28th Marines 5th Division, was ordered to climb to the top of the mountain, repel the enemy, and plant the American flag.
So our first mission was to put up this flag, which we proceeded to find a long water pipe up there, and was made just to order. Even a hole was shot through the pipe for us to tie the flag on. Proceeded to the top of the mountain, the highest spot, proceeded to raise it. Well, it just seemed like something just naturally to do, and all of a sudden they start cheering down below. The troops started to cheer. The ship's whistles out in the harbor started going. I tell you, it was an immaculate sight.
The only photographer recording this historic moment was Sergeant Lou Lowry.
The minute that flag went up, all hell broke loose. The Japanese came out of the caves. They were enraged, and they started firing at us. But I figured to myself, well, you've got your story, Lou. You got the story of the 40 men who climbed Mount Suribachi, and I think that's enough for today.
But Lowry's picture was not the one that made history. 2 hours later, a second flag, twice the size, was brought to the top of Suribachi. Orders were given to replace the original flag with one large enough to be seen by everyone on Iwo and on ships offshore. This time, 3 photographers arrived on the scene. Private Robert Campbell, Sergeant Bill Janoust, a movie cameraman, and Joe Rosenthal of the Associated Press. Rosenthal and Janoust quickly positioned themselves to record this second flag raising.
Just as I got ready to do that, Bill Janoust, with his movie camera, came across and to my right, and almost at arm's length. And he turned and said, "I'm not in your way, am I, Joe?" And I turned and said, no, that's fine, Bill, for you. And as I turned, I said, "Oh, there it goes, Bill." By being polite to each other, we both almost missed the shot.
Rosenthal had no idea of the importance of the picture he had just taken. As the second flag was raised, the first one was lowered. Campbell got the shot. Then Rosenthal asked the Marines to stand beneath the flag in a victory pose. When Rosenthal got back to Guam a few days later, he was congratulated on his already famous flag-raising photo and asked if it was staged.
I thought they were referring to the large group picture, and I mumbled something like, "Oh, yes, sir."
And so began a myth that persists to this day. But the truth is, Rosenthal's flag-raising picture was not posed.
I didn't select the number of men. I didn't select the spot. I didn't signal when it was to go. I had no part in directing this. If I were setting up a picture like that, I'm quite sure that I would have selected fewer men than 6. I would have had the men turn their heads a little bit so that I could identify them for their hometown papers.
Joe Rosenthal's picture became the most reproduced photograph in history. It won a Pulitzer Prize. But 3 of the 6 flag raisers did not live long enough to learn of their fame. Harlan Block, 20 years old, was killed 6 days after the flag raising. Michael Strank, 25, was killed by the same shell as Block. Franklin Sousley, 19, was killed just 5 days before the end of the battle. 3 flag raisers survived the battle and became instant heroes. Ira Hayes, 22, never adjusted to his fame. 10 years later, he died of alcoholism. Rene Gagnon, 19 when the photo was taken, died of a heart attack at age 53. John Bradley, 21-year-old Navy corpsman, was later wounded in both legs and sent home. Since the war, he has refused all interviews until this program.
I just happened to come along and see these fellows struggling with this long piece of pipe with the flag attached to it, and I just jumped in and gave them a hand. It's as simple as that. People refer to us as heroes. No, I personally don't look at it that way. I just think that I just happened to be at a certain place at a certain time, and anybody on that island could have been in there, and we certainly weren't heroes, and I can speak for the rest of them as well. That's the way they thought of themselves also.
Yes, I'm the fellow who took the photograph of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi. But the Marines took Iwo Jima.
The capture of Mount Suribachi was only the beginning. As the battle dragged on into weeks, it became a grueling fight to the death, waged man to man in caves and ravines, with flamethrowers, grenades, and bayonets. Advances were measured in yards, in rugged terrain nicknamed the Meat Grinder and Bloody Gorge. The Japanese fighting code would not permit surrender, so the Americans sealed off the underground tunnels and caves, one by one.
Physically, when I was in the caves, the worst thing that happened to me was the gasoline that the Americans poured in on us. It was suffocating. They poured fuel oil into the caves and then set it on fire. Luckily, I was able to escape, but I remember that was the worst thing that I have ever experienced.
Betty, can you imagine living in this place? The heat, it must be 98 degrees in here.
Inside our caves, we had a lot of hard biscuits and crackers. But unless we had water, we weren't able to eat them. At night, we leave the cave to go look for cans that the Americans had thrown away that had water accumulated in them from the rain. When there was enough water in them, we would pick those up and take them back to our cave and camouflage the entrance. We would pour the water over the biscuits to soften them so we could eat them and then drink the remaining water. It was very offensive smelling. I thought it was almost ridiculous to have to die at a place like this. Because of this philosophy, I had the greatest number of survivors in my unit. A lot of my superiors criticized me for my philosophy, but now my unit and I have a reunion every year, and we are extremely happy together.
Those Japanese who weren't killed fighting died by suffocation or suicide. Of 21,000 soldiers, only 1,000 weak or wounded men were captured. The remains of most of the Japanese defenders have never been found. They have become a part of Iwo Jima forever.
There were about 30 young school kids from 14 to 18 years old who were sent to Iwo Jima for a botany class field trip. And it just so happened that they got caught up in the battle and there was no way for them to return home. So they were forced to participate in the battle. They were given 2 hand grenades each, and they were told to attack the American forces. One grenade was to kill the American soldiers with, and the other grenade was to kill themselves with. And to this day, that has been the worst thing that I have ever experienced. And I still get tears in my eyes thinking about it. Please, let's all pray together. Our commanding officer was standing here with tears streaming down his face as he listened to the young 15 to 20-year-old soldiers singing one of their favorite songs, Clear Evening Sky. Let's all put our hands together and sing this song to the officer and young soldiers so their souls may rest in peace.
月影落ちて鈴虫鳴く思えば年故郷の空父母いかにおわすありがとうございましたこれで
Thank you very much. I think that we have made the spirits of the officer and the children very happy.
Before leaving Iwo Jima, the Americans and Japanese gathered just above the invasion beaches for a memorial ceremony.
We met here 40 years ago under conditions far different than today. Our countries were at war. We were bitter enemies. Now, as men in the twilight of our lives, we gather in dignity on this former battlefield in peace and friendship. Suribachi wept for the gallant men who fell at her feet, their blood uniting in a cruel bond of war. Suribachi smiles today for the souls of Iwo Jima, freed at last by a pledge of peace and brotherhood. Let this land remain a symbol of man's urgent need for peace. May the souls of Iwo Jima remain forever at rest.
Today, as both nations meet here in peace and harmony, we bring new meaning to the words Iwo Jima, meanings of peace. And today we shall commemorate this monument, inspiring all men to coexist in peace and harmony.
On the 40th anniversary of the Battle of Iwo Jima, American and Japanese veterans meet again on these same sands, this time in peace and friendship. We commemorate our comrades, living and dead, who fought here with bravery and honor. And we pray together that our sacrifices on Iwo Jima will always be remembered and never be repeated.
The unparalleled gallantry and selfless devotion that was displayed on this island 40 years ago have been amply recorded in history. Yet history should recognize that although the immortal words of Admiral Nimitz were then directed to the U.S. Marines, certainly those Marines would be the first to share that ultimate accolade with their Japanese adversaries at that time. Uncommon valor was a common virtue.
I feel better now than when I came. I was ready to slip right back on the plane and go home. But I think we're doing something good.
I had to watch the other fellas do it before I was able to do it myself. That is the handshaking and in some cases embracing of the Japanese survivors as well as the Japanese widows. But it's a very strange feeling because even after 40 years, the memory's still there that they were the enemy. After I had done it for a while, I became very glad that I had done it. And they were more than gracious, and so that made it easy.
Japan has been helped by America, and he feels good about coming back here.
Kawaii means cute boy in Japanese.
Cute boy in Japanese.
But I'm not too cute.
Tell him that I have a Japanese 7.7 bullet in my left hip.
彼の体の足の中で7.7の日本の
Maybe his.
Could be. Could be.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
So, yeah.
Sayonara.
Will the folks that are designated as being on the red airplane bid your farewells to our American and Japanese friends?
I've had the day of my life. It makes all the other ones mean something, you know. So, time to go. The average person in America does not appreciate what it means to have taken part in something where 4 out of 5 men were destined to either be killed or wounded. That's almost beyond one's comprehension. But even to survive, even to get off scot-free in the sense of not being wounded or on the outside in your body, is not to escape the wounds on the inside, which are probably in the long run more painful, more difficult to reach, and more difficult to live with.
What has the visit done to me after 40 years? It has released many harbored resentments toward the Japanese people. Looking back and remembering all those 40 years, I cannot believe today these people that I've met who appear so kind and toward everyone they meet and humble in a sense could be such vicious fighters. But yet, when I think of the whole thing, is I realize that they were following their leaders and their code, which was this way: we fight to win, and whatever's required, we do it.
I'm so happy that I was able to go and perhaps expel some of the demons which have haunted me and the others who served with me for all of these 40 years. I'll think of Iwo Jima now not always in the terms that I thought of it as before, as just a place of terrible bloodshed and destruction. Having seen it so serenely as it is, some of those thoughts of yesterday will temper my memories of the past 40 years. So I'm very happy that I was able to make this trip.
When I landed on Iwo Jima 40 years ago, I landed to kill Jacks, not Japanese, but Jacks. And 40 years later, I came back here, and I came in my heart and in my mind that I was sorry that I had to do this to survive.
So all the questions I've been asked on this trip, all of the attention that has been paid to some of us has to take second billing to the great chance of a lifetime to have carried all these things for years and then have the chance in a moment to say it, to give expression to it. My job is done.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.